Hello and welcome to the fourth in a series of short films about the women that are commemorated on the Dundee Women's Trail. Plaque number 16 is for Florence Horsbrugh, who was a politician, and she has a list of firsts attached to her. And because the list is quite long and some of the titles are quite complicated, I'm going to read them out because I could never remember them. So here we go. She was the first female Westminster MP for Dundee. She was also the first woman to move the address in reply to the King's speech. And I believe she was actually interviewed after that on television, and she was the first woman MP to be interviewed on the television as well. She was first to be both a Privy Councillor and a Dame Grand Cross of the Order of the British Empire. She was first to be a Conservative Cabinet Minister, and she was first to be a Fellow of the Royal College of Surgeons in Edinburgh. So quite a set of achievements there. She held on to her seat in Dundee for 14 years, and that's understandable when you know the sort of work that she was involved in. She arranged for trade agreements to help with the export of jute, and she also lobbied for the Caledon shipyard to be on the Admiralty list. And both of those things, of course, would help the economy and employment in Dundee. She also put forward two successful members' bills. One was to curb the drinking of meths in Scotland, and the other was to do with regulation of adoption of children. And in addition to that, she did a lot of preparatory work for what was to become the National Health Service before that went on to Labour, who passed it. And on top of all that, she seems to have just been a really nice person as well. She was apparently very warm and witty and generous, and she liked knitting, and just somebody I think that you would just a real all-round good egg. And her plaque is on it's in the building in Albert Street. It's the old Unionist Party building. That building doesn't exist anymore, so there's a new building in its place, but the plaque is on there. So yeah, Florence Horsbrugh, quite a woman, and of course within living memory, so you can see her picture in old newspapers, and there's quite a bit about her online as well. Plaque number 17 is for Mary Lily Walker. And if anyone deserves recognition, it's Mary Lily Walker. What an amazing woman she must have been. In a fairly short period of about 15 years, she did such a lot of work to help improve the lives of the poor in Dundee. She was very conscious from quite a young age of the appalling housing conditions in Dundee, and she set up a group of women to go around and kind of do like an inspection of the conditions that people were living in, particularly like the sort of sanitary conditions. And they compiled a report on this, which influenced change in the city. But Mary Lily Walker also set up things like after school clubs and like holidays for children to convalesce, and a sort of thing, it's like a sort of maternity leave. She set up a thing for nursing mothers where they would be paid so that they didn't go straight back into the mills after having a baby. I mean, it was just there's just not enough time in a short film like this to go into the detail and the depth of what she did and her impact. And her plaque is on Grey Lodge settlement, which is what she established. Her house is actually, Walker House is just behind it as well. When I first came to Dundee and heard about Mary Lily Walker, I thought she would have had statues. I thought that everyone would have known her, but actually there wasn't an awful lot about her. So I do hope that the fact that she's on the Women's Trail heightens her profile a bit, because things like breakfast clubs and after school clubs, we still have today, and we tend to think of them as being new innovations, whereas in fact, all these years ago, Mary Lily Walker was out there making a difference. Plaque number 18 is for Mary Brooksbank, who was a mill worker. She was also a lifelong socialist and member of the Communist Party. She was imprisoned a few times for her campaigning activities, and actually, eventually, she was expelled from the Communist Party because of she criticised Stalin. In addition to her political campaigning, she was a singer and a poet and a songwriter. And we might never have known about this side of Mary, but in the 60s, Ewan MacColl, the folk singer Ewan MacColl, was bemoaning the fact that there didn't seem to be much in the way of traditional songs from Dundee. And Mary disclosed her poetry at this point, and it resulted in a book being published called Sidlaw Breezes. And one of her famous poems or songs is about a mill worker in Baxter's Mill. And although Mary herself had never worked in Baxter's Mill, she worked in other mills in Dundee, we decided that Baxter's Mill was the appropriate place for her plaque. So that's where it is, up at Weaver's Yard. And you can see it if you walk up that way. Plaque number 19 is for Mary Slessor, who's probably one of the best known people on the trail. There's a beautiful stained glass window dedicated to her in McManus Gallery, which if you've not seen, it's really worth a look. It kind of tells her story in picture form. And of course, it was there long before our trail was established. Mary worshipped at Wishart Church, which is just near the Wishart Arch, and that's where her plaque is. It's on the building where the Wishart Church was. Apparently, below the church there was a pub, and so that locally the establishment was referred to as Heaven and Hell. But Mary's big ambition was to be a missionary. And she set sail to Nigeria along with a score of casks of rum. And she noticed that there was all these casks of rum and there was only the one missionary. And what amazes me about Mary is that she seems to have taken to life in Calabar incredibly well, considering that she was a Victorian woman going from a cold, Scottish city to a place where the temperature and the culture, everything would be completely different. But we have a lovely photograph of her in our book. And what always amazes me is that for a Victorian woman, she had cut her hair. She had her dress is kind of open at the neck. So she's not just sitting there all dressed up to the nines and buttoned up to the throat, the way that you often see images of Victorian women abroad. She has obviously adapted to her surroundings. And she worked tirelessly to set up clinics and schools and also a women's settlement for the women in Calabar. And all, of course, to improve and to help their health and well-being. So she's somebody who, even although she is well known, we felt it was really important that she also was recognised on our trail. Plaque number 20 is for Mary Buick. Her husband was pressed into the Navy and she went to sea with him. Now, that might sound incredibly unusual, but apparently it's not as unusual as you might think. There's a book called The Female Tars, which explains that many women actually went to sea with either their partners or for other reasons, and they're just not recorded. There's not a record of them in history. But Mary was, of course, involved in sea battles, and during the Battle of Copenhagen, she actually gave birth to her first child. And then during the Battle of Trafalgar, this is where she gets her claim to fame. She allegedly, along with another woman, was responsible for embalming Nelson. Now, her plaque is on the Unicorn. The Unicorn wasn't built in Mary's time. It's a little bit after the Battle of Trafalgar, but it would be a similar type of ship. And if you go to look at the unicorn and just try and imagine what it must have been like to be a woman giving birth in the middle of a battle in a ship like that. I mean, she deserves a plaque for her association with Nelson, but I think she deserves a medal for giving birth in a ship in a battle.